David Walliams made the world laugh. On Britain's Got Talent, he was the quirky, over-the-top judge who stole the show with his charm, wit, and unpredictable antics. But behind the contagious smile and flamboyant performances, David was hiding a deep, painful truth. The kind of truth that doesn't make it into highlight reels or press interviews. Because while the audience was laughing, David was often crying alone. From the outside, his life looked perfect. Multi-millionaire author, award-winning actor, beloved television personality, and adored children's book writer. But the public never saw the private torment, the decades-long battle with severe depression, the strained relationships, the deeply personal struggles with identity, love, and self-worth. And the scandal that eventually forced him to step down from Britain's Got Talent after years of loyal service only made things worse. The moment David Walliams stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage, he was electric, charming, eccentric, unapologetically theatrical. He wasn't just a judge. He was an experience. While Simon Cowell played the role of the stern critic and Amanda Holden brought elegance and heart, David was the comic relief, the beating heart of the panel. He flirted shamelessly with Simon, delivered zingers, and championed the underdog. But very few knew that behind the jokes and flamboyant energy was a man quietly waging war with himself. Long before BGT made him a household name, David's life was marked by silent suffering. In interviews, he's bravely spoken of his lifelong battle with depression, a shadow that began following him as early as his teenage years. And it wasn't just fleeting sadness. It was the kind of crushing darkness that could paralyze the soul. He described it as a black hole, something that would suddenly open up beneath him, dragging him into despair for days, weeks, sometimes months. David was born David Edward Williams in London in 1971, and from a young age, he knew he was different, sensitive, creative. Introverted, he didn't fit the mold of the typical schoolboy. He found solace in performance, in slipping into characters, in becoming someone else. That desire to escape became a survival mechanism. Comedy was his armor. And so, he learned to make people laugh, because laughter meant acceptance, and acceptance meant safety. But that smile, that laugh, that outward confidence was just a mask. Inside, he felt isolated, unsure, and emotionally fragile. As his fame grew, so did the pressure. When Little Britain catapulted him into stardom in the early 2000s, people fell in love with his outrageous characters. But what most didn't see was the emotional toll those performances took on him. David later confessed that fame only intensified his inner turmoil. In 2006, he even attempted suicide. That same year, he swam the English Channel for charity, a feat of physical and mental endurance. The public saw it as an act of heroism, but for David, it was partly a cry for help, a way to channel pain into something productive. The smile stayed on, but the cracks were deepening. His time on Britain's Got Talent was in many ways a golden era. Fans adored his chemistry with the judges, especially his playful banter with Simon Cowell. He brought levity to tense auditions and often defended contestants others dismissed. But off camera, David struggled. The long filming hours, the constant public scrutiny, the media's obsession with his personal life. It all took its toll. And it didn't help that his personal relationships were under constant attack. His marriage to supermodel Lara Stone ended in divorce in 2015, a devastating chapter that shattered him emotionally. He adored her. Their son was the light of his life. But the pressures of fame, combined with his ongoing mental health battles, made it nearly impossible to keep the family together. Despite all this, David never gave up on making people happy. Through his best-selling children's books, he gave kids joy, laughter, and hope. Through television, he made adults smile again. But inside, he was still the same boy, longing for peace, for stillness, for healing, for a man who wrote so beautifully about love, friendship, and acceptance in his children's books. David Walliams has faced a heartbreaking reality. The very things he writes about so movingly have often eluded him in his own life. His outward persona, confident, cheeky, even flirtatious, painted the picture of someone who had it all. But in truth, David's life has been filled with longing, disappointment, and the heavy ache of loneliness. Perhaps the most public heartbreak came with the end of his marriage to Dutch model Lara Stone. When they met, it seemed like the fairy tale he had long been waiting for. A glamorous, whirlwind romance that quickly turned into marriage and the birth of their son. But even fairy tales have shadows. The relationship, though filled with love, was strained by the pressures of fame, David's internal battles with mental health, and an unrelenting media spotlight that dissected their every move. By 2015, their marriage had quietly fallen apart. The divorce devastated David. He rarely spoke of it publicly, but those close to him knew. It shattered something deep within. He had always longed for a sense of permanence, for a family that felt safe and unshakable. The breakdown of his marriage didn't just represent the loss of a partner. It was the loss of a dream he'd clung to for years. And from that point onward, his emotional vulnerability became harder to hide, even behind the well-rehearsed smile he wore on television. Friends noted that David threw himself into work after the divorce, increasing his appearances, writing more books and taking on new challenges. But it was clear he was running from something. Or perhaps running towards something, healing, distraction, or maybe just silence. Despite being a public figure, David's private life has always been shrouded in mystery. Rumors about his sexuality, his romantic interests, and his emotional state have swirled for years. Some malicious, some curious. But David, with rare grace, has refused to label himself. He once said, "I think it's all about falling in love with the person," and that's what's happened. That fluidity, that honesty, was refreshing. But it also made him a target for tabloids eager to exploit his vulnerability. Time and again, David found himself the subject of invasive headlines. Questions he didn't want to answer were splashed across newspapers. Opinions he never gave were attributed to him. His mental health, his relationships, his identity, all became fair game for public dissection, and all the while, he kept smiling, even on Britain's Got Talent, as he bantered with Simon, consoled rejected contestants, and delighted the audience. There was often a shadow behind his eyes. Those closest to him have said that David has a melancholy soul, a kind, generous man with a heart far too big for a world this harsh. And despite his immense success, from multi-million book sales to national awards, there's always been an ache that fame could never cure. Fame, after all, is a double-edged sword. It brings applause, but it also brings isolation. People know the image. They admire the character, but very few truly know the man. Behind closed doors, David has admitted to feeling deeply alone. Even with all the adoration he receives, he has said that he sometimes feels invisible, that the very thing he worked so hard to build, his public persona, has at times become a wall he can't tear down. He once described it as being in a room full of people who love you and still feeling like you're completely alone. It's a haunting truth, one that so many who suffer in silence understand. But even in his loneliness, David Walliams has shown incredible resilience. And as we'll see next, the world he gave so much to eventually turned against him in a way that no one saw coming. For over a decade, Britain's Got Talent was more than just a job for David Walliams. It was a sanctuary. A place where he could shine, laugh, perform, and perhaps most importantly, be loved. The chemistry he shared with the panel, especially the banter with Simon Cowell, became iconic. To viewers, David wasn't just a judge. He was the heart and soul of the show. But behind the scenes, a silent storm was brewing, one that would ultimately bring his time on BGT to an abrupt and painful end. The betrayal that followed wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal, because for someone like David, who had fought so hard to find a place where he belonged, this wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing a part of himself. In 2022, private recordings from 2020 surfaced in the press, where David had made inappropriate and off-color remarks about some of the contestants during filming breaks. The comments, made in what he believed was private and off-air, were never meant for public consumption. They were crude, no doubt, but they were also clearly said in jest, not intended for harm, and certainly not for headlines. Yet when the tapes were leaked, the media went into a frenzy. The public backlash was swift. Overnight, David went from beloved national treasure to a man under fire. Headlines branded him cruel. Commentators called for his resignation. The same outlets that once praised his every move now tore him apart, quote by quote, joke by joke. And when the dust began to settle, the most devastating blow came. He was out. David Walliams would no longer be returning as a judge on Britain's Got Talent. No official farewell, no public support from his colleagues, just silence. After 10 years of loyalty, laughter, and unwavering commitment to the show, it ended without ceremony. To many fans, it felt deeply unjust. The show had capitalized on David's eccentricities and unapologetic humor for years, but the moment controversy struck, it distanced itself. No context was offered, no understanding, just a cold and calculated exit. And for David, that betrayal cut deep. Because Britain's Got Talent wasn't just a career milestone. It had become a second home, a place that gave him purpose during some of the darkest chapters of his personal life. It gave him routine when the world felt chaotic. It gave him a family when his own heart was breaking. And in a single news cycle, that world was ripped away. What followed was a painful period of retreat. David disappeared from public life, avoiding interviews and red carpets. He wasn't sulking, he was grieving. Grieving the loss of something he loved, and perhaps also reflecting on the cost of being constantly on. Friends close to him said the ordeal left him broken. He felt abandoned, humiliated, and misunderstood. To make matters worse, the incident reignited old wounds, the media speculation, the tabloid cruelty, the whispering voices questioning his character, his identity, his worth. For someone already fighting internal demons, it was a psychological blow that reopened every scar. And yet through it all, David remained dignified. No retaliation, no public outbursts, no smear campaigns, just silence. A silence that spoke volumes. It's often said that comedians are the saddest people in the room, hiding pain behind punchlines. And in David's case, the tragedy wasn't just in the jokes, it was in the silence that followed them. But even in the darkest moments, there is always the flicker of a comeback. And as the dust began to settle, David started to re-emerge, quietly, cautiously. Not on flashy stages or talk shows, but through his writing. Through stories that once again gave voice to the misunderstood, the awkward, the lonely, characters who, like him, just wanted to be seen. After the noise faded, after the headlines moved on, after the judgment passed, David Walliams was left with something far more profound than silence. He was left with himself, and in that space something quietly remarkable began to happen. Away from the cameras, the stage, the scrutiny, David Walliams started to heal. Not by proving himself to the world, but by slowly rediscovering who he was beneath all the roles he had played. In the aftermath of his departure from Britain's Got Talent, many assumed he would retreat into obscurity or bitterness. But David chose a different path. He returned to what had always been his true escape, writing. And not just writing for adults, but for children. Because there, in the pages of his wildly imaginative books, he could still offer hope, laughter, and belonging to kids who, like him, felt like outsiders. His characters, quirky, misfit, brave, broken, reflected pieces of himself. Gangsta Granny, Mr. Stink, the boy in the dress. All tales of people who didn't fit in, but who still found love and acceptance in unexpected places. In these stories, David found his redemption. He didn't need applause to feel worthy. He didn't need television ratings to feel valuable. What he needed, what he always needed, was connection. And even without BGT, he still had that. From children who sent him drawings of their favorite characters, to parents who thanked him for helping their kids fall in love with reading, David's impact stretched far beyond primetime television. In time, the industry began to take note again, not of his scandals, but of his enduring influence. His books continued to top charts. He received literary honors and his public readings sold out. But even as his star rose once more, David remained humbled by what he had endured. He knew now that fame was fickle. He had seen how quickly admiration could turn into condemnation. And through that painful lesson, he found a new kind of strength. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that thrives in quiet resilience. He focused more on his son, cherishing fatherhood in a way that no career achievement could match. He became more private, more selective with appearances, more grounded in who he was and what he stood for. And still, The kindness never left him. Friends say David is the first to call when someone's hurting, the one who checks in after the cameras go off. His generosity, often unnoticed, has changed lives behind the scenes. For a man who once considered ending his life, who was publicly humiliated, who was cast out by the very show he helped define, David Walliams has become a quiet symbol of survival. Not because he shouted his pain from rooftops, but because he walked through the fire and emerged softer, wiser, and more honest. Today, his smile still exists, but it's no longer a mask. It's a reflection of someone who has made peace with the laughter and the tears. Who knows that heartbreak doesn't define you, but what you do afterward does. He's no longer the man dancing for applause. He's the man writing stories that whisper, "You are not alone," to anyone who needs to hear it. And maybe that's his greatest performance of all. Not the one that made us laugh, but the one that showed us the courage it takes to keep going when the world tries to silence your voice.